we like to think that we teach something, that we put inside of someone, that we build person's skills. But that's not the way that any learning or development works. It all comes from the inside. It's all from within the person. You simply cannot put knowledge inside of a person.
If you've ever wondered why some people grow quickly while others stall, why great coaching doesn't always land the way you expect, or how learning actually happens inside a team, then this episode of Teams That Swear is certainly for you. Teams That Swear is a podcast about how leadership teams work better together, especially when the pressure is on. It's for leaders who care about performance and care just as much about the people experience as the results experience. Now, today's guest is Jeff Simmons. Jeff has spent decades working across elite sport, education, and performance environments, helping people rethink how learning really works. Now, this conversation was rich enough that we split into two parts. So in this first episode, Jeff and I explore how people become who they are, why learning is invisible, and what that means for leaders trying to help others grow without controlling them. And stay with us to the end, because I'll share a couple of practical ideas that you can try with your team to help them swear more by each other and not about each other. Here's my conversation with Jeff Simmons. How do you describe what you do?
I describe my work and my focus as learning and performance. It's how humans learn and perform, particularly high-level skill and under pressure. So my training and my advanced degrees made me a sports psychologist. I don't like the term sports psychologist, or I don't like the term psychologist, because most people interpret that in therapeutic psychology, clinical psychology, psychiatry, etc., which is a hugely important part of psychology, of course, and it's probably the most public-facing part. But there's a whole realm of research and practice in psychology that is outside of the therapeutic realm, and so most of my work would come from what you would call either social psychology or experimental psychology, which is experimental psychology really is the stuff of how people learn, perform, how things operate neurologically in terms of our attitudes, behavior, etc. So I now just call myself a learning and performance specialist, or something of the type. I am a professor, and I teach motor skill acquisition. I teach learning and performance aspects. I teach about research and methods. I teach about information literacy for people who are going into movement professions.
What are the types of athletes you work with? Because we're talking about learning and movement, learning and performance. You're talking about working with athletes.
Athletes is where my specialty is. My background is in kinesiology, human movement. So and my solid interest is in elite performance. So most of the athletes that I'll work with are elite performers. They could be junior elite, but there are people who are striving to be really good at what they do, or excellent, or the best. So the athletes that I'm working with, the coaches I work with, are all striving for very high levels of performance, whatever their level. And I'm typically working with Olympic professional, et cetera, when I am working with the athletes.
Then before we dig into the athletes you've worked with and how you work with athletes and how you work with coaches, how did you end up in this world? And what do you think drew you to?
Yeah. So I think at a most basic level, I was a runner, a distance runner, and I never had the cardiovascular capacity that many of my peers had. but somehow I managed to get more out of my performance than what would be predicted from the physiology, which came clear to me very much at university when I was doing my undergraduate, because I was tested many times in the exercise physiology lab, and I would look at what my compatriots, what their VO2 max would be, et cetera. And I was never quite up to that top group. And yet I could perform in competition at levels that they were at. So in other words, I was kind of outperforming my physiology. I wasn't really, but I was bringing my performance up closer to the maximum. And that fascinated me. What is it that's allowing me to go further than what's predicted physiologically? And I was intrigued with how it is that the person who's performing has an influence on their performance, if that makes sense. We tend to just think of the athlete as this object or this animal that just can perform really wonderfully. And yet there are tons of people who are what you might call physically gifted who don't perform very well. And there are a lot of people who only have modest or average or normal for a level gifts who perform exceedingly well. So what is the difference there? And that's what fascinated me and drew me to the psychology. The psychology of what it is that goes into learning performance, allowing people to perform at their best. So that was really my fascination. My cross country coach was an exercise physiologist. He saw my science scores and wanted me to become an exercise physiologist. And I said, I'm not really that interested in chemistry, biology, and all of that. I'm really interested in the psychology of performance. And he said, oh, well, we have one of those guys in our department. I'll set you up and he'll be your advisor. So he was a sports psychologist, an old wrestling coach who had gotten his PhD in sports psychology, and he was a great mentor. And his fascination with psychology was the same thing. He was so interested in how it was that psychology played a role in wrestling, dealing with nerves, strategy, decision making, all of the things that go into it. And he was fascinated in that, which led him to the psychology of sport. So that's kind of how I got into it, was just this interest. And I did a double major in kinesiology and psychology, but my psychology was largely motivational, social psychology, experimental psychology. How do humans operate by themselves and in social groups? So that's what brought together my undergraduate degree. I did a master's in sports psychology, and then went off to the University of Illinois and did a PhD in sports psychology in the kinesiology department. So I had this advantage of being able to be around people who were really knowledgeable at a time when there really was no profession in sports psychology. Early on, in sports psychology, I looked around, where are the sports psychologists? And really the only people that were out there working with athletes and teams were pretty much motivational speakers, or they were some sort of hypnotist charlatan type of person who said that they could correct somebody's slump or something like that. So there weren't a lot of people. There were a few random people around, but most of them were university professors who then on the side were doing a bit of practical work. And I chose a profession that there was no future for me.
Well, perhaps that was the thinking, but you proved that wrong.
Yeah. So as I've said, I think I told you before, Adrian, I worked probably with over 40 different sports, and I can't coach any of them. and only a few I've had even a dabble in. But what I'm looking for always are the principles that always apply to human beings who are learning and performing and striving under high pressure situations. That's the magic for me. That's the interest for me.
All right, we're gonna dive into that magic in a little bit, but what I heard is that this passion, there was some a curiosity and a lot of questions that came probably in your university stage of life. I want to tell us a little bit before that, like how when I'm working with groups, I'll ask this question each individual to share their individual story around how have you become who you are. So if I ask you that question, where would you start?
Well, I would start with my parents, as most people would. My mother was a college educated woman who was a nurse when she got married. She was a stay at home mom, but she was scientific and minded and intellectually minded. We read, we looked things up. I mean, if we had had Google at the time, she would have been all over it. Um, so we would go to the library to find things. And then my father was a school teacher. He had a degree in biology, zoology from the University of California, and he became a school teacher. Eventually, got his master's in education, and he was a wonderful teacher. He was the man that I wanted to emulate, and I wanted to be because of his caring in education. No, to caring of the person, and then trying to figure out ways that you could understand what it was you were trying to learn. So he always had patience when we couldn't get something. He would say, "Well, let's come at this from another angle." Rather than saying we were wrong. And I watched him do this with other students. He would always say, "Well, somehow we're not getting this across. Let's look at this from another way." And then he would work at trying to find a way that he always believed that people could gather the knowledge and build up their competency just with the opportunity and time. And so that's kind of, I wanted to be an educator of some sort because of him. And then the humanism came from both my parents. They just had great hearts. And my mother was the first hospice nurse in Northern California, I think, for a nonprofit when hospice wasn't available in the United States. It was this foreign idea, and so she worked with dying patients, which always seemed to others that it must have been draining for her, but she found it just fulfilling and a wonderful experience to being able to guide somebody through their last months. Because when she got a client, they probably had a few months to live, and so her whole thing was, well, how do we make this time that you have?
Yeah.
And so she would help with talking to relatives and all those kinds of things, but just spending time with people and make them feel like they're not alone. So you can get a sense of the emotion. I mean, I become emotional when I talk about it because it's so deep inside of me. This. So I always loved doing something that then would help somebody else become better at what they are. Now, I have an ego. I love it when I've worked with someone and I see them succeed. But I don't tend to then make a big deal about it in terms of me. It was what they did. I get to quietly say, I helped support that. And that's the thing that gives me great, deep kind of satisfaction.
Let's go back to the 6-year-old Jeff.
Sure.
If we ask your mom, hey, pick 3 words to describe what Jeff was like at that stage of his life, what would she say?
She would say precocious. that I talk like an adult. She would say I cared about my friends, that I was kind. And then she probably would say that I kept a very sloppy room, and didn't always do my chores. I, normal kid, right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, my wife will be happy because we're having these discussions about one of our children, and she's concerned that his room is always messy and whether she should pull back a little bit. I said, I think that's kind of the normal thing. So I've got a good case study here to say things turn out all right.
Yeah.
Well, you're around this environment where education was important. Dad was a
Yeah,
teacher.
absolutely.
Um,
Absolutely.
and that caring, from what I heard, came from both. Like Dad
Yeah.
was like, if my students aren't learning, it's about what can I do better to help them
Right.
understand. And then obviously, Mom is a nurse. I think nurses are wired so different. They just there's this caring gene that they're able to demonstrate that care in a different way than most. But also the fact that she dealt with people in their last stages of life, which again takes is a different level of caring and a different approach. Now, Jeff, I want to ask you about something I've heard you speak about. I've heard you speak in rooms that really it stops people's thinking. And they have to think about it twice, but you can tell when they get it. But that learning happens within the player. And as a coach, it's hard to tell when that learning actually happens. What do you mean by that?
Well, we like to think that we teach something that we put inside of someone, that we build person skills. Whether it's our athletes or our children, we make them. We create their knowledge for within them. We build that in there. We like to think that somehow we think we have that kind of control, but that's not the way that any learning or development works. It all comes from the inside. It's all from within the person because there is no other way. You simply cannot put knowledge inside of a person. You cannot put a skill inside of someone else. You cannot put anything, even an attitude or an emotion within someone else. It always is created by the person, within the person. Development, learning, feeling, thinking, emotions are always from within. So if we're trying to move someone from this level of ability or this type of thinking or this type of emotion to another space, we have to be the best we can do. The best we can do is to facilitate the growth of that person towards a better outcome. And so really we only can be facilitators, guides. We can provide opportunity. We provide support. We provide information. Certainly the knowledgeable coach has tons of information that can be provided for somebody to learn off of. We provide feedback about how you're going and what you're seeing from the outside. We can't know exactly what's happening on the inside because as any educator will tell you, learning is invisible. That's a John Hattie from the University of Melbourne. He's written books on learning is invisible. Learning is not something that's out there you can see. You can only see you can infer learning from watching what changes happen for the person over time. But that's an inference of learning. That's not actually watching the learning process itself. There are changes within the person that are happening that allow them to know more, be able to do more, and change their perspective, for good or bad. Anyway, we can provide extrinsic motivation. We can provide rewards. We can provide punishments that kind of feel like they're guiding somebody where you want them to go, because you can punish them for going in your mind the wrong direction. You can reward them for going in your mind the right direction. So you can create that. That's part of the environment that the person is actually operating under. So extrinsic motivators of all kinds definitely do shape behavior. They don't cause any behavior. They shape knowledge. They help a person to shape it for themselves. If we are trying to make a skill like a Lego character or something. Which we think we'll just put the blocks together and everything will look the way we want it to. If we're trying to do that, yes, you will get a Lego character, but that's not the real thing. You can make a really beautiful Lego.
What do you mean that's not the real thing?
Okay, let me give you an example. My daughters had some really fancy Legos that they could create like flowers and castles and all these amazing things. It's not real. Human beings, we are organic, living, breathing, changing, dynamic organisms. And you can provide the conditions under which someone can grow. You can even try to train it a bit in the way that you want it to go, by guiding, but all the growth is from within. So this is the same for human beings. We think that we put students in a classroom and we give them knowledge, they know something now. Or we put an athlete on the field and we teach them how to kick a ball or throw a ball or catch a ball or whatever it happens to be. And then we have done it, created this character. It doesn't happen that way.
Or we take a group of leaders and we put them through a 12-module leadership development program.
Perfect. Yeah.
And we've created leaders.
They can spit back the words that you told them. What you hear back, if they're just mimicking back and you think you've achieved something, they just know what you want to hear. The place at which you understand whether someone's learned is whether they have taken that information in, made it a part of themselves, and then are expressing it in ways that are recognizable, but still from their perspective. So I've talked a lot about this with Brandon, an athlete that I worked with for many years, and I've worked with in many different ways. Drew Ginn, we've talked about these things. Drew is one of the great rowers of all time. He's a 3-time gold medal winning rower, and he's got a silver medal as well. Over
Australian.
Australian rower, known around the world. His first gold medal when he was a young, maybe a 20-year-old, was in 1996. His last silver medal was in 2012, where he went back just to help the young guys learn how to actually row a boat, and took a silver medal. Anyway, he's an amazing, fascinating man, a great leader, a thinker all the time. We've spent a lot of time talking about what he likes to call the inside-out athlete. That is, an athlete is only real from the inside out. What you see on the outside is the shell. What you see in a performance is an outcome, something that's the result of all the things that happened inside. And the same goes in any endeavor. You can talk about what the person has achieved, sales numbers, a successful business, whatever it happens to be. But that's just a marker on the outside and doesn't really describe what happened from the inside out. How did the person get to this place? What experiences did they go through? What did they use in order to get there? What have they owned that they've actually been able to use repeatedly, successfully? And of course, if you want a healthy person, what things have they done to adjust to make sure that they're true to themselves and true to the values that they hold, so that they can be a full human being? Because we certainly can, especially in Western society, we value outcomes so much that it is relatively easy for somebody to think the outcome is the only thing that matters. Therefore, it doesn't matter what you do to get there as long as you get there. Your problem is if you haven't been healthy on your way to the outcome, you're not going to be healthy when you're there with that outcome. You're going to be an unhealthy wealthy person. You're going to be an unhealthy, successful,
Yeah.
quotes, person. Something that I very commonly about with elite athletes who are striving, let's just use striving for Olympic
Yep.
medal, Olympic place, Olympic gold, they're striving for. The anxiety, the pressure, the uncertainty is enormous. Because think about the probabilities of any single person actually winning an Olympic gold medal. It's preposterous. It's just ridiculous. The odds are so much against you. So, yes, you want to objective of being the best in the world on the day, at the moment, and having the skills and abilities and tactics and whatever is required in order to achieve that. But if the effort that goes into that is not worth it to you if you don't win the gold medal, then it won't be worth it if you do win the gold medal, because you'll be left empty. I do this comparison. It's unfair because I don't like there's this kind of person, that kind of person. There's only two, but by the way, there's only two different types of people in the world. Those who believe there are two types of people and those who don't think there are only two types of people. Anyway, that was my, and I happen to be the second one. I don't believe there's two types of people, but my experience, I've seen these two things. On one hand, you find the Olympic champion, the prize winner, the whatever, who has that laurel, has that accomplishment, who is dissatisfied, is lost, has crappy relationships, has difficulty, can't manage themselves. It's just like they have this thing and they keep holding on to the one thing that they got because it was supposed to take care of life for them. Okay. Years ago, and I know she's told this story, years ago, I had a little bit of time with Tracy Austin, who at the time was the youngest world number one tennis player in the world. She now sometimes does commentating for, but she was the youngest. And at the time, I think she was 16 or 17 years old. Nobody had ever, it may have even been 18. But nobody that young had ever been world number one. And she, of course, had worked towards that. That was what, from being a little girl, coaches all the way through, pressure from her parents, every opportunity in the world, push, you become world number one. I remember, and I can tell this because she's told this story out in public. I remember sitting and talking to her, and she said, the best day of my life, the absolute best day of my life was the day that I achieved the number one ranking. The worst day of my life was the next day when my mother came knocking on the door, wondering why I wasn't up at 4:30 to go to practice. Because I realized that world number one doesn't solve anything. They just want me to do more. I thought like the whole world would, relief would come over me, but no. So there's this one pot that have these different versions of huge achievement, emptiness, stress. Then I have these other wonderful people and these are the people that tend to be, that I stay friends with over time and stay with, who they'll say, oh yeah, I achieved that. That was really, really cool. The gold medal was really cool. But what I remember was that time when remember that time we were in Germany and so-and-so got sick and then we had to throw somebody else in the boat? Or remember that time when we all decided that the coach should get thrown, onto the pitch and da-da-da-da. And they tell stories. The stories are about things they did. I love the training when we were at altitude. I love, I can remember those times when it got so grueling, we weren't sure if we could get through it, but then we did. Yeah. And it was so cool. They tell stories. And the amazing thing is, Adrian, is they then turn around after that gold medal and continue fulfilling into their life. they go on.
There's a few things I want to jump into. But so how do you define then, and I don't know if they're the same thing here, winning and success? Because I don't know if you're familiar with James Carse's work, and I came across this when I read Simon Sinek's book, The Infinite Mindset. But James Carse would talk about two types of games, finite games and infinite games. So finite games, sport, start, finish. There's a set of rules that everybody plays by the same rules. There's a clear winner and loser.
Right.
And it starts and ends. Whereas an infinite game, obviously, by the name infinite, the game never stops. You don't know if you've actually won or not, or what your contribution is. The purpose of the game is to keep it going. There's a set of rules, but they can change at any time. And new competitors can come on the block at any stage. And so what Simon Sinek did to build off those two concepts was, in business, his view was the goal needs to win the infinite game. And in business, the infinite game is to keep the business going. And then there's 5 different characteristics of a leader that was required to win an infinite game. But when I read that, for me, I was like, so what does winning mean? And when you were talking about that, you reach number 1, you've won, you're the best.
Mm-hmm.
But does it end? Is that winning? So that's how do you define success and winning?
Well, winning is a finite thing. Winning is when there is a finish line of some sort, and you get to do your accounting. Were you first? Did you have the most? Whatever it happens to be. So a win is a win in finite games and finite activities, and that can even be a year-end accounting of profit or something. There's did you win or not? But it's a singular moment in time, and it's a singular marker. You're better than to the next thing you're going to do because you are a human being. You're not a human done. What I did.
I love that.
Some people will walk around forever telling you about what they did. That justifies who they are now. But that's always unfulfilling deep down. It's because it isn't who we are as humans. We're living, breathing, organic beings, and that term being means ongoing something. So we're either being and living and enjoying and challenging and going about some way of fulfilling life, or you're dying, you're complaining, you're ruining, you're denying your existence.
Yeah.
So winning has its own thing. Success also can be based on markers, but almost always success tells you kind of a progression. Like, I became successful here. I have a marker. Success is, I felt like I did a pretty good job. Things worked pretty well.
Yeah.
Obviously, for a lot of athletes I work with, success is making an Olympic team, which is phenomenal in and of itself. And yet of course the public only cares about who won the gold. In fact, they don't even care that much about who won silver, even though it's on the day. There's probably several different people who could have taken that gold, but it's only the gold that people love, that shiny thing from the outside, because they think it means something really special. But for the person who earns it, it's a nice shiny thing to look at and hold on to. But you got to get on with your life. What we hope is that success is a rolling is also a rolling thing.
It's a continuum.
Our markers, it's a continuum, because the more that you are moving, and with success means also living through failures, because you're obviously, then you're living, then you're experiencing, then you're finding ways. I mean, if you want to get really philosophical, we're finding ways to justify our existence. Each one of us is. We're trying to figure out why the heck are we here, and what's the reason for me to exist. Well, Mortimer Adler years ago, American philosopher, said your only obligation in life is to live.
Your only obligation in life is to live. Ooh, okay.
Because he said the thing is we don't know if there's something else you're supposed to do. We don't know there's anything you're supposed to achieve. And no one is born supposed to achieve any particular thing. Just as no one is born knowing how to hit a tennis ball, no one is born with a particular objective in mind other than to be a living, breathing human being. So our only obligation in life is to be a human being. Now you get to play around with, well, what do I feel will live up to the values and the ideals and the truisms within myself, and what I'm learning, and how I move from where I am now to where I am next.
So I want to go back to something about the human being and human done, but I don't want to lose sight of this. You know how some people will say, this person was born to do that.
Yep.
I'm wrestling in my mind going, are people born to do things, or is the purpose of life to keep living and then work out, and then you'll see what happens, or you'll decide what happens from there? We are getting quite philosophical.
Well, no, I mean, I spent a lot of time working through philosophical things, because the truth is your strength comes from feeling that you're on some sort of a right path, that you're on a path that your strength really comes from feeling like there's a path that has meaning and a sense for you. Okay. So I'm not a fatalist, and I don't believe in a pre-written fate. If there are pre-written fates, that is, someone's born to be this, then that's already preordained, which means why even have the life? Just mark that one down, and go back and start again. Because if it's already predetermined, then there's no sense in actually going through the motions. Why do it?
Gonna happen anyway.
It's going to happen. It's either you're predestined to do this or not. But love the idea that someone was born to do something, because it provides an illusion of certainty. It also provides cover for any insufficiency that you have as a person. Because what you say is, well, I guess I wasn't meant to do that. And because I wasn't meant to do that, well, then I can't feel too guilty about the fact that I didn't do it. Like, I guess I wasn't, I mean, think about this. I guess I wasn't supposed to be the kind of person who was a faithful husband. And therefore, you can't really blame me for having cheated on my wife and neglected my family, because that's just the kind of person I am. Do you see how that it's very close to nihilism in that nothing matters because it's all predetermined. That doesn't get anybody anywhere. First of all, I don't believe it's true that anybody's born. There's a great book, The Genius in All of Us. I think that's Schenck. And he does a really good job of talking about the Mozart is a genius issue. There is no doubt that some people are born with certain capabilities that are beyond others, because we're all along a spectrum somewhere. And there's always going to be somebody who happens to be like the tallest person, the strongest person, the most intellectually on there. So there are certain things that are going to shape what kind of future you go towards. But there's a really good, he does a really good job of talking about Mozart as a genius, and I'll try to be really fast with it. Mozart didn't become the Mozart that's considered a genius composer out of the blue.
Yeah.
He was born to, his father was a court composer and a very prominent music teacher, I think in Vienna, right? His sister, who was like 3 or 4 years older than him, his father had already made into a bit of a protege. And, he would take her around to show her off. And because there wasn't somebody really to take care of Wolfie, he hung out with his sister, and he just hung out watching her play the piano all the time. It's like his first language was music. And then the father, way before the Suzuki method, realized that in order for
the Suzuki method?
The Suzuki method is you first of all, it's intuitive. It's very dynamic systems. It is listen to notes and try to create notes. The Suzuki method is specifically with violin. And you start children with violins, but you allow them to try to create the sounds that they're hearing, but you also make little violins that are right size for them.
Oh.
So, because why would you ask a young child to take an adult violin? It's too big. So the idea is you get them learning experientially, but you also give them the tools that are appropriate to their size. This is actually constraints-led.
I'm going. This can be a good segue, but okay.
So Mozart's father builds him a little piano, so he can sit next to his sister who's practicing on the piano, and he can play with that. Now, this is when he's, 1, 2, 3, 4 years old. He's playing. He's trying to mimic his sister. So we go on, and the history goes on. He, of course, because he's a boy, because he overtakes his sister with recognition. By the time he wrote the symphonies that music scholars considered to be genius, he had written something on the order of 400 symphonies, 500 symphonies. He had written all kinds of stuff. He had composed tons of things, and it was only in his early 20s does he create the music that you think of as, genius Mozart. And it belies the fact that he spent his whole life learning to become a master composer, a master of instruments and of sounds that then revealed themselves with new creativity, but not out of the blue. It's not out of the blue.
Hey there, it's Adrian here, this time a few days after I spoke with Jeff. Listening back to our conversation, what struck me most was how often leaders assume learning happens because they explain something clearly or set the right expectation. Jeff keeps reminding us that learning is invisible. You only infer it over time through behavior and change, not agreement in the moment. Now, before I share 2 practical ideas that you could try with your team, here's one small ask. If this episode gave you language, perspective, or something worth sitting with, consider following the podcast or sharing with a leader that you trust. This is how conversations keep going. Now, here are 2 things that you could experiment with. First, stop asking yourself, did they understand? And start asking, what's changed over time? Look for evidence of learning, not compliance. Secondly, notice where you're trying to push answers into people rather than creating space for them to build understanding themselves. Even a small shift there can change how a team shows up. So go on, give one of those a go and see what you notice. Now, in part 2 of our conversation, Jeff and I move from how learning works to how leaders can create the conditions for it. If performance matters to you, and so do your people, that's a conversation worth checking in. So be sure to check it out. Good luck, Cheers.